Annika went through a lot of transitions. She was an only child for the first, 6 years?
5 years of her life.
Yeah, 6 years actually.
Years, yeah.
And she went through both of her parents' remarriage.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were how many?
5 total siblings added.
Yeah, 5 half siblings added. And all of this was within a 3-year stretch of time.
Yeah.
And there were also several moves in there. She also switched schools.
Our dad's house moved, we moved, switched schools, all in the first 3 years. Welcome to the Blended Family Coaching Show, where you'll discover how to move your stepfamily from just surviving to truly thriving.
Grab your headphones and listen in as we share practical, real-life strategies for building healthy bonds,
Understanding the kids' perspective,
romance and partnership,
parenting with great teamwork.
and yes, even co-parenting with a difficult ex.
We're Mike and Kim Anderson, and we believe with the right tools, every step couple can overcome the common challenges of stepfamily life.
Join us for authentic and sometimes comical conversations to discover how you can lead your family with confidence and create the future you really want.
Well, hey, thank you for joining us. Welcome to episode 18. We are so glad that you are here. Mm-hmm. You know, we were recently asked by a listener if we could offer some tips around navigating big transitions or change. That can be really challenging. And, you know, transitions and change is hard. It's hard for kids and it's hard for adults.
That's exactly right. You know, sometimes as the adults, we don't always handle it all that well. And sometimes we assume that kids are really adaptable, that they'll be able to roll with all the changes that blended family life brings. And sometimes we even believe that they're really emotionally sturdy. They can bounce back from loss and they can handle difficult emotions. But the truth is that most kids really don't have the development and the emotional skills or maturity that they need to adapt to all these different changes and to navigate those emotional challenges that come when they're faced with a big transition or a change in their life. And then to compound the problem, kids often feel powerless. If you look at all the dynamics going on in a blended family, kids have the least amount of control over everything that's happening in their lives. And sometimes it can be hard for them to accept all these things when they feel like other people are making decisions that greatly impact their life. And that's tough. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there can be a lot of different kinds of transitions and changes that kids go through. Sometimes it's having to do with sharing their living space with a new step sibling, or having to share their parent with a new step parent. That can be really hard. Maybe they're having to move homes and move away from a neighborhood they grew up in, or even having to switch schools. Sometimes our kids need to change school districts. There can be all kinds of different things. And children living in step family dynamics, it's very common that they will experience some of these troubling emotions, things like sadness, anger, confusion, resentment as a result of all the changes going on that they didn't necessarily want or ask for. Now, honest time now. When we first got together, I wasn't really sure how to emotionally support my daughter. Mm-hmm. And Annika went through a lot of transitions. She was an only child for the first, 6 years?
5 years of her life.
Yeah, 6 years actually. Years, And she went through both of her parents' remarriage. Mm-hmm. And then there were how many?
5 total siblings added.
Yeah, 5 half siblings added. And all of this was within a 3-year stretch of time. Yeah. And there were also several moves in there. She also switched schools.
Our dad's house moved, we moved, switched schools, all in the first 3 years of both parents remarrying.
Yeah, I think it was tough for her because in the beginning she had 4 adults all focused on her. She had all of our attention, and then all of a sudden all these half siblings were added to both homes, and she didn't get that same degree of attention. And that was a big transition for her. And there were some issues that came up for her that I actually didn't handle very well. So we've learned over the years how to handle these transitions and changes better. And that's what we're here for, is to share this with you, what we've learned, and what doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. One of the things that I tried to do a lot was distract her. You know, I would see her upset or sad, and I kind of try to pick her up and, hey, let's go do something fun, rather than actually helping her walk through her emotions. And that really isn't very helpful for kids.
Sure.
It doesn't help them to process.
Yeah, you know, when we see big changes coming, we want as adults to be able to support our kids and help them move forward. But sometimes we just don't know what to do, right? We got to ask our question, well, what in the world should we do? Well, let's talk about a few things that we can do in order to help them really move forward.
Yeah.
One of the first things that comes to mind is just don't put it off. You know, when we know that a difficult conversation is coming, it's pretty common to try and procrastinate, right? We don't want to have to deal with it. And sometimes we're then forced into having that conversation. So we don't want to put it off. But we also don't want to rush into it either. And that's part of what we really want to offer you today is how can we be strategic about how and when we're going to handle this conversation about an upcoming transition so that we can really help kids move forward and move into the transition as opposed to just staying stuck and kind of feeling upset about it.
Yeah. And another reason why you don't want to put it off or procrastinate is because you don't want to open up the door for your kids to find out from another source.
That's a good point.
I mean, especially things like engagements. You know, if you're telling your close friend or your mom and your child overhears you talking on the phone or finds out from another source, that can make things so much more difficult for kids. So you want to be open and honest with them, and you don't want to put it off. So how do you prepare yourself? How do you get strategic? And the first thing is to prepare your own emotions. You've got to kind of take some time to get yourself together, because you're probably going to need to expect that there's going to be a large emotional reaction.
Yep. Possibly an emotional explosion.
From your child. That's right. And you want to be prepared for that. It could be anything from screaming and crying and panic to silence and withdraw. Yeah. Could even be some sarcasm or even just completely denying the whole thing is happening.
Yep.
And so you might be blindsided by their reaction if you don't take a little bit of time to emotionally prepare yourself for what may come.
Yeah. So that's step one, preparing yourself, getting yourself ready for the possibility of an emotional reaction.
I mean, you want to hope for the best, but you also want to prepare for the worst.
That's good.
If your kids freak out, it doesn't mean that you have to freak out.
That's right.
You can stay calm and steady regardless of what emotions are coming at you.
Yeah,
it's really important.
Next, you really want to think through the things that are going to bring a sense of stability, because that's usually what the kids are actually reacting to, is a feeling of being unstable or out of control. So if we can help them to understand what is changing, but even more importantly, what's not changing in the middle of this transition, that can be a really great way to help them stabilize as they go through this news.
Yeah, and we did that with Annika actually when we first got married, and this is just around a small thing.
Yep.
Is when we got married, Mike and I both worked at the same place, so we decided we were going to carpool together to work. So I had to sit Annika down and say, "Listen, honey, once we are all under the same roof, Mike and I are going to drive into work together, which means that you're going to start taking the bus to school. Right. I won't be driving you to school anymore. And I know that's new. I know it's different, but I'm going to remind her also of the things that aren't going to change. But we are still going to have breakfast together as a family every morning like we always have."
That's right. So that's just a small example, but sometimes changes are really big. Maybe a child is getting the news that they're moving to a new school. Well, hey, look, we're going to be moving to a new school, but you're still going to be able to take piano lessons from that same piano teacher that you've been with for a long time. Or you're still going to play on that same sports team that you've been playing on. Maybe they're moving to a new town, but it's really close. Well, yeah, we're going to move to a new town, but you know what? Visitation with dad isn't going to change.
Right.
Like that's one of the big questions they have, right? Of, oh, what does this mean for my other parent? Or maybe we're moving to a new house and we want you to know, hey, you're still going to get your own room in this new house. We're going to make sure you have your own space. So figuring out, yes, we're going to make a change, but also what's not going to change can really help them to stabilize. And really, one of the things that can be most important to kids is their closest relationships. And those are the things they start getting afraid of when you talk about big transitions. They start thinking, well, what does this mean for visitation? What does this mean for my school, my friends, my extracurricular activities? And so the value of finding those things that are going to remain the same, especially when it's related to their most important relationships, can really bring a sense of stability even in the middle of the change. So look for those things and be prepared to talk about them right away.
That's really good. Now, once we've initiated this conversation and we've told our kids about the change or about the transition that's on the horizon, the first thing we want to do next is stop talking. We want to use our ears and we want to listen to our kids to understand where they're at, how they're processing. Now, a lot of us are thinking, oh, well, yeah, I'm really good at that. And I used to believe that too.
Yeah, like duh, Kim, right?
Yeah. But when we really honestly examine our own thoughts during a conversation, what we might discover is that it's a lot harder than we think.
That's true.
And Mike and I, we've admitted to each other that a lot of times when one of us is talking, the other one is devising their response, their rebuttal, rather than actually listening.
Wait, what did you just say? I was trying to think of how I was going to respond.
There you go. And we do that with our kids all the time. So what we want to do is we want to really try to understand. We talk about this all the time, right? In our blogs, we're kind of that broken record. We talk about it in our coaching, in our podcasts, and it's just so important. We cannot overemphasize the importance of really listening to understand.
Yeah, and listening to understand is an art.
It is. For
most of us, it's hard to master that art, especially when it comes to our closest relationships, like our spouse and our kids. I'm actually a certified life coach, and most of the training for coaching that you get when you're going through certification is learning how to listen effectively. And so here I've been professionally trained to be a good listener, and I still struggle to listen and really listen to understand when it comes to a conversation with Kim or one of the kids.
Why do you think that is, honey?
I think just because sometimes it's about our comfort level. You're the person I'm the most comfortable with. And so I can just let my guard down and I don't always have a purpose behind the conversation and all of that. Whereas
so you're on autopilot, is that what you're saying?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I am. Yeah. I think you are sometimes
I do the
too.
Same
yeah,
thing.
Exactly.
I know.
But when we're with clients or when I'm with someone who is really trying to work through something, I'm kind of on and I have a purpose and I have a goal. And so it's just different listening to in that environment.
Yeah. I think sometimes we assume too that we know, because we know each other so well or because we know our kids so well, that we already assume that we know what they're thinking or feeling.
Well, I do know that.
No, you sometimes, but not always.
No, I know. I totally agree with that.
But don't you agree with that? Wouldn't you say that we tend to do that with the people we're closest to? Sure.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's talk about one thing to avoid as well as one thing we can focus on instead. So here's what we want to avoid. Avoid going into fix-it mode.
Ooh, that's hard for you.
It's hard for all of us as parents because, there's two issues that we deal with here. One of them is trying to fix our kids' problem because nobody wants to see their kids in pain. And when they're struggling, we just want to make it better for them. So we're strategizing how we're going to fix it for them. And sometimes these are things that just simply can't be fixed. The transition is going to happen. We're not necessarily going to change the plan because of their emotional outbursts.
That's right.
But we still want to try to figure out a way to fix it. And so we get into fix-it mode that way. Now, there's another little kind of under the surface, almost hidden tendency that many of us have. And that's trying to fix our problem, our own problem, right?
Yep.
Usually it has to do with, like I just said, we're not comfortable with their difficult emotions or kids' difficult emotions that are coming up as a result of the conversation. And so sometimes, we're trying to fix their problem, but now we're trying to fix ours because maybe we feel like we have to defend ourselves or justify ourselves. And we're trying to fix that emotional response that we're having, not just theirs.
There's a lot of tension.
Absolutely. If you realize that you're trying to explain away their complaint or you're brainstorming ways to change their mind about what they feel, you might be trying to fix your own problem.
Yeah, you're definitely not listening at that
point. That's right. And, when you start working on fixing that problem, the result is the kids are going to shut down and they might be left feeling unheard or misunderstood.
Yeah.
So when we're in fix-it mode, we're actually kind of hijacking them.
Yeah.
And so we want to stay out of
fix-it
fix-it mode. Yeah. Instead of going into fix-it mode, what we really want to focus on is being in curiosity mode. We want to take on a curiosity mindset. How do we do that? Well, there's a few ways to do this. One might be just simply asking yourself a question silently in your head. Ask yourself, what must it be like to be them in this situation?
Yeah, putting yourself in their shoes.
Absolutely. And that gives you kind of that curiosity mindset, genuinely asking those questions. If you want to take that kind of even another step further, you have to kind of use your imagination for this. But you might ask yourself, how would I respond if this wasn't my child, but it was my best friend's child, or it was my niece or my nephew? Because typically those kids that are in your life are just a little bit kind of emotionally farther from you than your own child is.
A bit removed.
Yeah. And so you could create a little bit of an emotional distance, just pretending, so that you can hang in there in the moment and do a better job of listening.
Yeah, that's a good strategy.
Yeah. It's just it doesn't work for everybody, but it's one way to think about it. Another thing you can do, this is one that I like to do for myself, is I consciously want to challenge myself and say, okay, self, before you make any statements or make any suggestions.
Or share your sage advice.
I have such wonderful sage advice. Before I do any of that, I'm going to challenge myself to ask 3 clarifying questions so that I can really dig deeper into what it is that they're feeling and understand them better.
What's an example of that?
Yeah. So a clarifying question might be, tell me a little bit more about why that makes you upset. Mm-hmm. Tell me what it is that you think you might miss out on if this change happens. Tell me how you think this might impact your friends if this happens, or your siblings if this happens. We're so excited to let you know about something brand new we've created just for you.
We've realized that with so many episodes available here on the show, it might feel a bit overwhelming to find the topics that matter most to you. That's why we've created a simple tool for you to receive a personalized playlist focused on your current struggle or your biggest challenge.
That's right. It's called the Blended Family Breakthrough Quiz. You'll answer just a few questions, and based on your responses, we'll email you a curated custom playlist of episodes that are specific to you.
This simple quiz will direct you to the most impactful episodes that pertain to you personally and keep you on track in your journey of discovery, learning, and growth. So, scroll all the way to the bottom of the show notes for this episode and click the link to take the Blended Family Breakthrough Quiz today.
Okay, let's get back to the discussion.
I know one you use on me all the time, honey.
What's that?
Help me understand.
Oh,
dot.
I know. The kids the kids get tired. They roll their eyes like, oh, there's Dad again.
But there's something about those words because you're expressing that you want to understand where the other person is coming from. You're not just assuming you know. You're not jumping to conclusions, but you're asking a clarifying question. Help me understand why you think this is so hard for you.
That's good.
And it keeps them talking because they understand that you want to know.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Which is really cool.
Yeah. So when it comes to listening to understand, we're avoiding fix-it mode and we're focusing on a curiosity mindset.
Yeah, that's good. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing we need to do, and this is all in that emotion coaching realm. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's what we're kind of walking you through here. But the next step is validating your kids' emotions. Now that you've used your ears and you're listening to understand, it's time to use our mouths. And all we're going to do in this step is validate their emotions around this issue. Validation takes a little bit of mental gymnastics on your part because it's common for our kids to feel differently about these situations than we do. And that's hard for us to wrap our heads around. We want our kids to feel the same way we do. Mm-hmm. You know, moving into this new house is going to be great. Look, we've got a bigger yard. It's got a garbage disposal. You're going to love it. But our kids,
garbage disposal.
Well, whatever.
Every house has a garbage.
We haven't always had a garbage. Okay,
well, that's true. Yeah. That's true.
But for them, they're not looking at that. They see it completely differently. They're seeing all the things that they're giving up or they're leaving behind or they're missing out on. So just because your kids have a different perspective than you, it's okay. That's all very normal. So it's going to take a certain amount of focus and energy for you to really hang in there with their point of view when you're validating their emotions, even when you're not on the same page, right? Yeah. You see things completely different than they do.
When you're excited about the garbage disposal and they're just not. Yeah. Sorry, I'm hung up on the garbage disposal. I was
excited about a garbage disposal. I haven't always had one.
I love that.
But think about this. When you're hurting, when you're struggling yourself personally, who is it that you want to talk to and open up and share with? Right? Is it someone who comes in and tells you that you should be feeling differently than you actually feel? Or is it someone who's willing to listen and really wants to understand you and validates any of the difficult emotions that you're having before they jump in and start exploring solutions? Chances are you want that person that's going to listen. And kids want the same thing. Mm-hmm. They need a safe adult to express their emotions, and they need to know that it's okay to have difficult emotions, especially when they're facing a transition.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So how do you actually start to validate their feelings?
Well, our number one go-to tool for this is active listening, and it's super simple. Anyone can do it. Really, active listening is just repeating back exactly what you heard the child say. And again, you're not necessarily agreeing with them. You're just repeating it back to them. And what this does is it lets you know that you're engaged in the conversation. You're not just zoning out, and that you actually heard what they were communicating. You get it. Mm-hmm. Now,
so, Mom, I don't want to move to a new neighborhood.
You don't want to move to a new neighborhood.
That's what I said. I don't want to move to a new neighborhood.
You don't want to move to a new neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that's all you're doing. Yeah. That's all you're doing is you're repeating it back. Now, it sounds a little bit hokey, but we've used this and it actually helps a lot. And there's tons of research around it because what active listening does is it can have a soothing effect on kids. When they know that they're being heard, they can actually relax a little bit. Okay, you get it. You heard me. They don't have to defend themselves or fight for their right to be heard or push it down your throat. And this release of stress actually helps them to continue on expressing deeper emotions, more fears and concerns. And you need to know what's behind that initial emotion.
It wasn't that long ago where we were headed somewhere and Jacob really didn't want to go. And I remember you were in your room. You told me about this just recently. Tell that story a little bit.
I can't remember it. You tell it.
What? You don't remember? He was not wanting. I can't remember where we wanted to go, and he was just like on his face in his bedroom. I don't want to go. And you, I think 2 or 3 times, just said, "You don't want to go get in the car." And then you just waited patiently, and then he said something else, and you said, "You don't want to go. You don't want to go get in the car." And he was quiet. And then pretty soon he just kind of slumped over. He got up, he put his coat on, and he just
30 seconds later.
Yeah, it's actually amazing. Just you're basically saying, I hear you, but you're not giving in, and we're still going to do the change. We're still going to do whatever's coming up.
You're still holding your boundary, but you're letting them know that you understand. And it's really a form of empathy.
That's right.
Rather than saying, you are going, get in the car. That's not being very empathetic.
Right. And, when it comes to this whole validation thing, we're trying to help kids and sometimes adults, like we do this with each other, to process through difficult emotions. And so you end up doing two things. Number one, you make them feel truly heard.
Yeah.
Because only after they feel like they've heard you are they going to start to be open to
you've heard them.
You're right. Only after they feel like you've heard them are they actually going to be open to you giving them input.
Yeah.
And we want to get them open.
Yeah, you don't want them to shut down.
Yeah. And then by validating, the second thing is by validating their feelings rather than correcting their feelings, we're really leaving the door open for them to start sharing at a deeper level about where they're really at.
Yeah.
So, while we're listening to understand, we're actually making some progress toward getting to the validating the feelings and then moving them forward in the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, listen to the difference in how you approach this and how you validate kids. Let's say the child is upset. You just announced the news that you're moving to a new house in a new neighborhood.
Bum, bum, bum.
Yeah. So listen to the difference.
Like my sound effects?
I'm not sure. Responding to your kids with something like, well, you'll make new friends at the new neighborhood. That's really discounting their feelings and kind of trying to paint a silver lining around something, which is not helping them to feel heard. Instead, focus on statements like a validation statement. You do have really good friends in this neighborhood, don't you? I can see why you're going to miss them.
Yeah.
I wonder how we can stay connected with your friends here. Do you have any ideas around that? So they know you've heard them. You're validating. You do have good friends here. I understand why you feel that way. And now you're moving into problem solving mode.
Yeah. And now you've just leaped into our next step.
Did I take a big leap?
That's okay. No, that's a good thing. It
Too
was
big a leap?
That was a nice segue. So before you jump into that next step, we just want to back up for a second. So we're dealing with big transitions and big changes. And the first thing that we're going to do, I'm going to do a quick little recap.
Sure.
First thing we're going to do is to prepare ourselves for the potential of an emotional outburst.
Yes.
It could happen, but like Kim said earlier, just because they explode doesn't mean we need to implode.
Yeah.
I don't think you said it that way, but it's basically what you said.
Yeah.
Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to be prepared even before we initiate the conversation to share what's changing, but even more importantly, what's not changing, because that brings a sense of stability to the kids. So then when we enter the conversation, we're going to share the news about the change or the transition, and then we're going to close our mouths. The first thing we want to do is really listen to understand, and we're going to hang in there. And then we're going to actually validate their feelings. And if they're good feelings, then it's easy to validate. If they're tough feelings, we want to hang in there with them.
Active listening.
Recognizing that, hey, I totally get that you don't want to go through this transition.
This is hard for you.
Yeah, exactly. And so once we've validated them, now we're going to start moving, like Kim said, into problem solving mode. And what do we do there?
Well, the number one thing you want to do here is help them gain some control back. Remember, we talked in the beginning about how kids can feel powerless. There's all these changes that they didn't ask for. So what we want to do is give them some control back within reason, control that we can handle. And that gives them that sense of, okay, I have some control. I have some stability over my own life. I have some choices. And so you're going to actually give them some choices.
Yeah. Choices that you're okay with.
That you're okay with.
Yeah.
Things like, we're moving to a new house and we're going to be painting your bedroom and you get to choose the color.
Here's 3 colors you can choose from.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say.
Don't leave it too open. Yeah.
I was just going to say.
I want it black.
Give them a color scheme. Yeah, exactly. But any way you can, anytime you can give them some control or some choices, that is so helpful in them feeling less powerless around all these changes taking place.
Let's talk about some universal things that we can think about when it comes to giving kids some control. We've got this great resource specifically for kids that are maybe under 12 years old. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's a book. It's called Jessica's Two Families. I don't know who.
It's by Lynn Hugo.
Lynn Hugo, and we're going to put a link to it in the show notes.
Yep.
And again, if you have kids, probably 12 and under, I would say it's appropriate for. But sometimes it's really helpful to read a story with your kids that they can really identify with. And in this story, it's about a little girl who's transitioning between two homes. She's adjusting to step family life. She's got a new step sibling, and there's all these things that come up, big emotions. And one of the things that the book talks about that we really like is to help your kids explore some of the good things, some of the things that they're okay with, and how can we make those things bigger? Or even if it's just one good thing, how can we make that bigger? And then, of course, they're going to talk about the bad things, the things that they don't like. And if you can pick one bad thing, how can we make that bad thing smaller? So that's inviting them into the problem-solving process. Kind of brainstorm with your kids, like the example I just gave. Yeah, I understand you're going to miss your friends from the old neighborhood. How do you think you can stay connected with them? Can we set up, a time to hang out once a month? Can we do sleepovers? How can we make that happen?
Can I tweak what you just said? I would initially say, how do you think we could stay connected to your friends in the neighborhood and then be totally quiet?
Yep.
And then as they wrestle through trying to figure out and brainstorm on their own, then you might even ask permission. Is it okay if I give you some ideas?
Yeah, you're good at that.
And then kind of roll into the different ideas like you were just throwing out. It's so easy for us as adults to try to give control and say, hey, what do you think about that? Maybe we could do this. Maybe we could do this.
And then
maybe
take it right back.
And then you've got
that's
the
what I just
back.
did.
Yeah.
I also veered into fix-it mode a little too quick.
Exactly. And see how easy it is?
It is.
Yeah,
It's very easy.
Thanks for being an example. And we didn't even practice that.
But you want to enter into a process of problem solving. How can we make the good things bigger?
Yeah.
How can we make the bad things smaller? And
That's right.
and this book can walk younger kids through that. And it's really, really helpful. So use that resource if you've got younger kids.
We'll link to that. Yeah. Now, so we've just walked you through all these steps. There's one last thing you need to do, and that is don't assume that this conversation is one and done.
Oh,
right?
no.
We've got to keep reminding the kids about the things that won't change. We've got to keep listening to them to understand, because chances are their emotions are going to go a bit up and down as we go through the transition.
Yeah, they're probably going to need a little extra reassurance.
Sure. Along the way, we're going to validate those emotions when we hear them.
Yeah.
And we're going to help them to gain some sense of control around how we're going to solve the problem together.
Every time it bubbles up.
That's right. And I want to encourage you, don't just wait around for it to bubble up, like Kim just said.
It will.
Once in a while, periodically, just check in.
Yeah.
Hey, how you doing? What do you think about how this change is going? Simple little questions just to do a quick check-in.
Do you have any new thoughts around that? Yeah. And remember that you've probably been processing this big change for a while.
That's right.
Especially if it's a marriage proposal situation.
Or a house, a move or whatever, especially if the kids are a little bit younger.
You've been processing, thinking about it, working on them. So for you, it's kind of old hat. But for your kids, this is all brand new to them.
Right.
It's going to take them some time to catch up.
Yeah, because you're weeks or maybe even months ahead of them.
Yeah. So be gentle in the process. Right. Give them the time they need to process. Don't get impatient with them. Yeah. Let them continue to talk about any troubling emotions. Every time it comes up, do your listening, your validating, and then help them, guide them through some problem solving.
That's right. Well, those are our tips for moving through transition, big changes. Hopefully that brought some value for you.
Yeah.
Next week, kind of related, like when we're moving everybody into the same home and all that, one of the big blow-ups that can happen can sometimes be between step siblings when they're just adjusting to kind of getting to know each other, or even after a couple of years of living under the same roof. So next week, we're just going to explore some ways to help step siblings connect. How might we figure out ways to just kind of bring them a little bit closer together, maybe reduce some conflict?
Yeah.
So we'll explore that next week. Until then, that makes this episode a wrap.
Bye for now.